Welcome everybody to the Woden Valley Community Council public meeting. Tonight is Meet the Candidates Forum. I'll launch straight into introducing everyone, and then we will have our acknowledgement of country by Janara, and then we will have 2 minutes for each candidate, and then we will open up to questions. Okay, so we do have a lot of candidates tonight, so we'll just have to see how it works. The reason is because Woden is split between 2 electorates. We're in Bean. If you live in the south of Woden, south of Hyatt Drive, you're in Bean, and if you live in the town centre, you're in Bean. If you live in north of Hyatt Drive, but not in the town centre, you're in Canberra. So it's always a tricky thing when you split across electorates, so we are keen to know how our candidates are going to represent us. Sometimes you feel like you fall through the cracks when you split between electorates, so we're going to see how we go. All right, I'll introduce everybody. And I'll just give a little blurb on each one as you do your 2 minutes. So down the end here, we've got Jamie Christie, who's an independent for Bean. Then we've got Janara Garangaring, she is a Green candidate for the Senate. Then we have here Catherine. Catherine Savory is a Green candidate for Bean. Green.
I can't see them.
Stand up.
Oh, stand when you when I say who you are, perhaps. And you know, maybe somebody could ask the Southern Cross Club if they could bring some more chairs in. That might be handy. If you know, people might still be coming in at 7 o'clock. Usually we don't have this many people before 7 o'clock. Therese Faulkner. Therese is from the Australian Progressives, and she's standing as for the Senate. Last election, she stood as a Bean candidate. Yes. Okay. So we have Sean Conway. He's from the United Australia Party, and he is standing for Bean. We like it when you make it easy. Here we have Kim Rubenstein. Thank you. Standing as an independent for the Senate. David Perkoff, standing as an independent for the Senate. Okay, we have Slade. Slade Minson. Slade is standing as a Liberal for Canberra. Maddie Northam. Maddie is standing with Katie Gallagher as a Labor candidate for the Senate. David Smith is our Labor candidate for Bean and is the incumbent Bean candidate. And then we have Jane Hyatt, who is the Liberal candidate for Bean. Alicia Payne did say that she would come. She is the incumbent Labor candidate for Canberra. However, she has COVID, I do believe. So she can't come. But that's okay. You have plenty of people that can voice their views. All right, now let's welcome Janara Garangaring to do the acknowledgement of country.
Hiya everyone. When Aboriginal people do the Welcome to Country, we do it a little bit different from Acknowledgement to Country in the way non-Indigenous people do it. So I will sing a song from my mother's country as I sing to the Ngunnawal people to say, hello, this is who I am, can I come into your country? And then we wait for the acknowledgement to come back from them. Garin in the Namin, Juju Mabiranu, Garin in the Namin, Juju Mabiranu, Garin in the Namin, Juju Mabiranu, Gaya Mama Rangu, and Jagun Gungayungum, Jagun Gungayungum, Garin in the Namin, Juju Mabiranu, Garin in the Namin, Juju Mabiranu. So I thank the Ngunnawal ancestors and the elders and families and children of this place for taking care of this country for so many thousands of years so that we can benefit by living on it today. And welcome everybody to Ngunnawal country this evening. Thank you.
Okay, let's get straight into it. Maybe we'll just work our way through the candidates. 2 minutes each. Judy's timing. Jude stands up. Is that how we're going to do it? That's your 2 minutes is up. Okay. So you've got a microphone down there. Let me just say, Jamie Christie is an independent candidate for Bean in Norfolk Island. His grandfather came to Canberra in 1927 and he moved to Garran when it was the last suburb. I moved to Torrens when it was the last suburb. He worked as a junior doctor at the Canberra Hospital in 1990, then worked in Canberra's emergency departments since 1995. He believes we need to get serious about climate change. Over to you, Jamie. Welcome.
Is it working? Yes. Thank you, Fiona. I'm standing as an independent, and so many of the other candidates are party candidates, so they're representing their party. I feel it's important if I'm an independent, you will be voting for me personally. I'm standing because I stood in 2019 because I felt we needed to do something more about climate change, and it's been disappointing for me in Dave Pocock's line that the Business Council of Australia this year has a more ambitious climate target than either of the major parties. I still feel I feel the major parties are going to enable to deliver anything on climate change. The other issue that I would wish to speak about is integrity and truth telling. I think integrity is doing the right thing, not the thing you think you can get away with. As a marker of that for me, I was disappointed to see that both major parties had sent these flyers suggesting that people might like their details for a postal vote to be returned to party headquarters. It seemed to me that at this point in the Liberal democracy experience, where we have the experience in the United States and we have some of the sort of more fringe elements of our own society pushing stuff about electoral fraud, to set up a system where we were going to return postal vote requests to the parties to forward on to the Electoral Commission was disappointing and unhelpful. This one's authorised by Dave Smith, and I spoke to Dave about this. I mentioned this today on Monday evening. I feel that I think all of the people here have a degree of integrity and are seeking to do well for, to do the right thing by the country. And I was, again, disappointed that Jane, who is clearly a person of integrity and commitment, felt that she was able to stand in support of our current federal government, where the Federal Liberal Party has gone to court to state that it doesn't have a duty of care to future citizens, and won that case. Thank you.
2 minutes. Okay. Thank you, Jamie. Dinara. Dinara Green. We've said that, agreed to candidate for the Senate. She is a Waka Waka woman from Central Queensland, an academic, unionist, former public servant, and a proud grandmother. She's running for the Senate because she believes we have a responsibility to look after one another and the country that gives us life.
Thank you, Fiona. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to my colleagues here, all of us, and to all of you. I thought I'd say a little bit about my life because many of you would not know me. I'm a Waka Waka Woolly Woolly woman, as Fiona said, and my country's in Central Queensland, but my second home has always been Canberra. I came here in 1978 as a 20-year-old after university in Queensland and 6 months travelling around Australia being a truck driver and a birth mover and lots of other things, because I'd spent 15 years using my mind to study and I needed to go and do some practical work. And I've worked in many fields in my life. I made a decision when I was 16 that I wanted to do as much as possible and learn as much as possible because I wanted to know a lot of things. And even though I spent 20 plus years in the public sector and the other 20 plus years in academia, and a little bit in between in community. I actually have done a lot of things in my life, but particularly those things are things that make me the kind of candidate that has experience, I believe. I worked in women's refuges here in Canberra in the 80s, particularly Toura Women's Refuge, and as an addiction worker in recovery and the detox field, and that has been my field of academic research for many, many years. I spent some time in America working in detox and rehabilitation clinics, learning about family systems theory and the way in which addiction and dependency affects all our families, no matter what your race or colour is. And this was greatly important to me because I was trying to find out what was wrong with my own First Nations community and why we suffered so much from the things that had happened to us. And I've always had that idea that it was possible for anyone to recover and it was possible for anyone to have a good life. And so in my own life, I've lived between two worlds. I grew up. 2 minutes is so quick.
Okay, Catherine Savary is a Greens candidate Bean. She's an accountant, artist and small business owner, which has given her the skills to be a treasurer for arts organisations and a think tank. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Fiona has said a little bit about me, but I have lived in a number of places, but I'll say a little bit about me first, but I finished school in Canberra. I actually went to Phillip College. I still call it Phillip College, even though it's now Canberra College. My first job was actually in Woden Plaza, and yes, I still call it the Plaza, but I know it's Westfield. I lived in the area, and I now work in Phillip, and I live in Western Creek. Look, I'm running as candidate because I just think we need urgent action on climate change. It's, you know, a lot of us are probably going to say the same thing, but we may have different policies to back it up. Obviously, I think we should have a federal ICAC. One of the reasons I first became an activist was that the art school I went to in Sydney was actually going to be taken over by a bigger university. And I'd never been in a protest march in my life. And I actually thought I was apolitical, which is really crazy because I'm clearly not. But I realised that things are not always fair, and they don't. I'm a fairly logical sort of person, and I just think more people need to get involved for action. And you know, if we don't do something now, I don't know what will happen. I despair of the lack of action, and I don't want to complain about the government. I just really want to talk about what the Greens think we can do. As a business person, I believe that we can have a stronger government as if more Greens are in. We need to focus on innovation. We need to expand industries where, you know, we should have more research in universities. Our university sector has been destroyed. If we put more money into that, we fund public schools, we do so many things, we can increase our income from taxes. Not tax rates, not tax rates.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, our next candidate is Therese Faulkner. Therese is the president of the Progressives Party, and she's standing for the Senate. She has a strong background across a wide range of corporate program areas and has managed the Australian Volunteers for International Development program. Thank you, Therese.
Thanks very much, Fiona, and hi everyone. Look, yeah, I've lived in Canberra since I was 4. I grew up in Belconnen, and I bought my first house in Isabella Plains and raised my children down in Tokoroong. Now living in the north, my kids and grandkids are variously spread around Belconnen. My parents had a Mr. Fluffy home in Canberra. My grandfather taught at Western Creek High School. So I've got a brother who is a recipient of disability services, another brother in IT, and a sister who works in the arts. I've been strongly involved in the arts and sporting communities in Canberra for a long time. So I think I've got a few credentials to represent people of the ACT in the Senate if elected. I joined the Progressives because I think there were a few things lacking in the political parties that I've had a look at in Australia. And the things that attracted me to the Progressives were the values of particularly ethics, empathy and equality, and I think government with those qualities would go a long way. I worked as a public servant for a long time, for about 30 years, and as a public servant we were held to the highest levels of account, transparency, accountability, treating each other with respect, zero tolerance towards bullying and harassment. But where do we see those values in Parliament these days? I think it's time to restore that level of integrity and ethics in Parliament. The Progressives are basically three big priorities here in the ACT. One is around long-term planning. Let's not just plan for 3 years, let's look for 100 years. Public service, let's restore public service to what a wonderful national asset that is, and it's heart beating really strongly here in the Woden Valley and other parts of the ACT. And let's address what I would call this political emergency, this slippery slide into more and more corruption. We need to halt that now. Thanks.
Well done, just finished in time. Thank you, Therese. Our next candidate is Sean Connelly. He is standing for Bean for the United Australia Party. He's a long-term admirer of Canberra and recent resident. He's had years of public servant experience and management consultancy. Thank you, Sean.
Hello, I just want to say when one gets the microphone. I have been a long-term public servant and I've been flying in and out of Canberra for a very long time. I feel, I've developed a love for Canberra. I'm here to stay now. I've been looking for a property in Tuggeranong, so if anybody knows where something good is, let me know. While the pandemic started, I started to think about what was it really all about and how much money we were spending on it. And I was thinking, my goodness, it's a lot of money. We're up to $1 trillion. The expense is absurd. And from my colleagues, I haven't heard a plan to repay that debt. So when the call went out for United Australia Party for candidates, I decided to run because they are the only party who has a plan to pay back the $1 trillion of debt. All right, that's me.
Oh, thank you, Sean. Okay, Kim, independent candidate for the Senate, and a short little blurb. She's a distinguished law professor and an expert on how government should be run to serve the best interests of the community. She's an author, human rights advocate, and a mum. Kim.
Thank you very much. And what a privilege to be standing here with fellow candidates. This is the most inspired activity as an active citizen, and what has been driving me for the last 25 plus years professionally and really throughout my life is that sense of ensuring that we are all active citizens. And we have a moment here in Canberra. This is a moment where an independent can be elected to the Senate to finally have direct representation for your needs around around issues to do with housing, education, health, things that Canberra needs more direct representation on to have our true needs taken into account. Not only do we have that opportunity, but we have that opportunity for the power within the Senate. We know that no matter who wins in the lower house, they will not have a majority in the Senate. So your Senate candidate as an independent can be there to ensure not only the needs of Canberrans are taken into account, but that we can influence the balance of power. And around those areas of the influence, I'm committed to integrity in Parliament. I've been teaching for 25 years the fundamentals of how we ensure integrity, and my students have been seeing how it's declined significantly. We need to restore FOI and the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. We need to restore the Ombudsman so that the Independent Commission Against Corruption that I will support will be a safety net, not a necessity. We need to move on climate action. The partisanship that our parties have shown for over 2 decades needs to be broken, and my climate compact that I'm happy to talk about more is a real structural way of moving forward. We need to move on safety for men and women in their homes, in the workplace, and in our Parliament, and I'm committed to moving forward with Kate Jenkins' report so that all of us can feel safe in our environments. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, David Pocock. Independent candidate for the Senate. He migrated from Zimbabwe as a teenager and went on to captain the Wallabies and vice captain the Brumbies. He is an advocate on many issues and co-founded community initiatives that work to build climate solutions.
Thanks, Fiona, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are an animal country and pay my respects to elders, past and present. Rugby brought me to Canberra a decade ago, and I fell in love with it. I love living here, love being part of this community. Outside of rugby, I grew up on a farm, so I'm really interested in agriculture, I have a master's in sustainable ag, and I'm really interested in our relationship to the land and have been involved in some conservation projects, all those sorts of things. But like so many people, have been deeply frustrated by politics over the last number of years. And I really believe that we need people in politics who aren't career politicians, who are actually in there to represent communities that they love on issues that are important to us. So I was asked last year to run as independent. I put my hand up, was endorsed by the Voices of group here in Canberra, looking for an independent candidate for the Senate. And this year I've been out in the community talking to people and building a policy platform that I really believe reflects what the majority of Canberrans want, and things that have been politicised for too long, and that we just need a pragmatic way forward. So I'm really excited about this opportunity. I think looking at the last 2 years of politics, for me it's been independents like Helen Haynes, Rex Patrick, Jackie Lambie, Zali Stegall, that have actually talked about things that really matter to us. We're facing some really big challenges, from housing affordability, cost of living, politicisation of climate. We need other voices that are going to hold whoever forms the next government to account and ensure that we're actually making progress as a community, as a society, and as a country. Thank you so much.
Okay, our next candidate is Sir Minson, candidate for Canberra. He's lived in Canberra for the last 30 years and is now raising his family here. He's got a background in property and development and is passionate about making Canberra the best place to raise a family, get an education and start a business.
Thank you. I was wondering what you were going to say there. Actually, so you've been on my Facebook page, so it's great to see so many people here, I must admit. So on the campaign trail, you get a mixed bag, I think, of a lot of conversations, and there would appear to be a lot of people who aren't so engaged. And so I'm enjoying the campaign so far. So a little bit about me, I think, because then it comes to a question of what sort of person is the right person to represent the community. And I think I have been in Canberra for 3 decades. It's quite a while. I did grow up in Sydney initially, moved around the country a little bit, and like a lot of people, ended up in Canberra for a job. Wasn't staying, but here I am 30 years later. So in regards to my bio, if I was to tweak it a little bit, I've got 3 kids. I'm a dad. I'm a pretty regular kind of guy. Modern family. I've been married, I've been divorced, and so I have a lot of life experience, I would think. And I think when we do ask the question, and we can go into all the policies and the parties we represent, but the right sort of person with the right sort of credentials and who does represent the broader community and a lot of views, then I think they're good questions to ask. And what I think I sort of would bring to the table is a lot of experience. I've worked in the private sector for the whole 30 years. I think my first job was for half that, actually 15, 16 years. I've worked in small business, large business, and ended up in around sort of real estate and property and sales and marketing and a whole range of things. So I have a lot of views on housing affordability, naturally, and ways that we can kind of work to make Canberra a better place for families. And I know it's very cliched about raising families and making this Canberra a wonderful place, but there are things I think that we can do, and along with
You're going to see if that microphone's working, otherwise we'll send this one down. So Maddie Northam is standing for the Senate with Katie Gallagher. She's also the ACT Regional Secretary and the Community and Public Sector Union and the President of Unions ACT. She stands for working people. Over to you, Maddie.
Thank you very much. You got ahead of me in my own introduction. I was thinking, what is she going to say? I don't know if anyone's prepped her, but there you go. Everyone, I do come with apologies from Senator Katie Gallagher. As you've probably all seen, she's very much on the campaign trail as the Shadow Finance Minister, but she did want me to pass along her apologies. So I'm supporting Katie because, and for context, I'm Katie's number 2 on the Senate ticket, because Katie has stood up for us all for so long, whether it was as Chief Minister or now as our Labor Senator. And the Labor Party stands up for us as well. Now, we know the cost of living has absolutely skyrocketed in recent years, and you know what hasn't skyrocketed? Your wages. Now, yes, you're probably not surprised to hear me say that. I'm a union official, but this is actually deliberate policy by the Liberal government to keep wages low. They're quite open about it. They say it. It's part of their economic policy. Now, we don't think that's good enough. That's why Labor believes in a high wage, high productivity economy. And look, we're the party of Medicare. I don't want to see us go down the path of America. I'm sure most people in this room don't either. Labor started Medicare, we will keep Medicare. You can guarantee that under a Liberal government. We've already seen 900 cuts to Medicare, let alone all the cuts we've seen to Services Australia, which everyone probably knows as Centrelink and Medicare. In the most recent budget, the Liberals cut 2,719 jobs out of Services Australia at a time when we're relying on them for floods, fire, COVID, and all those sort of things that are happening in our community. We need them, the government gets rid of them. They don't care about the public service, they don't care about Canberra, and they don't care about regular people. They care about their mates in big business. So we're also the party of secure jobs. Now, we'll introduce same job, same pay legislation.
Well, moving on to Labor, again, David Smith. Prior to being in Parliament, he was the Director of the ACT branch of Professionals Australia. He's lived in the Bean electorate for most of his life.
A long time.
A long time. I suppose as you get older,
Almost the same as you.
And he believes in the value of community and public service. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Fiona. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are meeting on First Nations land and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. And look, I have spent nearly my whole life in Bean. I grew up here, went to school. My first jobs were at Big W, Woden, Montezuma's, Phillip. And look, I chose to raise my family here. It's a great place. I think it's critical if you want to represent an electorate that you should live and be part of the community so that you can actually understand the needs so that you can deliver them. So, look, over the last couple of years, despite the lack of investment by the government, we've been able to work with 60 different community groups to deliver more than $500,000 worth of projects here in Bean. That includes things as varied as community gardens. We've worked with Canberra College and Oz Harvest to rebuilding storage capacity, outdoor athletics over at Phillip, to delivering the Salt House meeting room and fit outs at Kamari down the road, to doing lots of work with Shout and other organisations. And look, the real opportunity we have is to have two governments possibly working together, and that's what I want to see, is the capacity to deliver properly for the ACT by having two governments that are on the same page. And look, it's not just about local issues, it's about national issues, and I think it's pretty clear we're not on the right track. We need to act on climate change. We need to restore and rebuild capability in government and rebuild integrity. And it's critical we address cost of living pressures right across, not just here in the ACT, but across the country. We've got a team and a plan right across the country where I think we can actually not only deliver nationally, but also deliver on a local level.
Thank you, David.
Okay. Tim's just come in. Thank you, Tim. Tim is the Greens candidate for Canberra. He has over 2 decades of experience working for climate action, including Greenpeace and the Nature Conservation Council. He's a director at the NGO, a writer, musician and founder of Green Music Australia. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks so much, Fiona, and I apologise for being slightly late. I was running from another appointment. I also acknowledge that we are here on stolen land, and how important is it that we put front and centre in our politics that we need to heal the deep, deep wound at the heart of this nation. As Fiona just said, I've spent 20 years, basically my entire adult life, working for the strongest possible climate action that we can get. And in all sorts of spaces, in advocacy, in policy, in the community, in community solar farms, and in building social environmental programs on the ground. And over those years, it's become increasingly clear to me that the main reason we're not getting the action that we need is because our politics is not operating for people and the planet, it is operating for private profit. It's operating for the private profit of the donors to the major parties and to mates and for big corporations in this country. We need to fix the political system so that it is actually about democracy. And democracy is my deep, deep passion. And I get my passion for it in no small part from my Holocaust survivor grandparents, who taught me the very clear lesson that people, ordinary people in the community, do extraordinary things to help each other, while those with immense power abuse that power terribly. And they taught me the lesson that none of us is safe until we're all safe. And that, to me, is what Greens politics represents. That none of us in the community, people, but also the natural world that we share this planet with, none of us is safe until we are all safe, until we take care of each other. The Greens platform is all about making sure that we share what we have, so that those with the immense wealth in this country have that wealth taxed so that they contribute back into the common pot, so that we can do things like make mental health care and dental health care part of Medicare, so that we can do things like make education properly, universally, freely available, so that we can do things like investing in a big build of public and social housing across the country. All of these things are what we need to do to make us all safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, moving along to Jane Hyatt, Liberal candidate for Bean. She's a former small business owner, educator, Navy veteran and mother of 4. She has been a resident of Canberra South for over 30 years and has been an active community member. Jane is a runner, having completed over 24 marathons and ultra-marathons. That makes me feel weird. She is passionate about ensuring more opportunities for the next generation to build a better future. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you to everyone who's come tonight, and thank you to everyone here. I actually want to acknowledge David Smith. You are the sitting member of Parliament. I give you that courtesy, that respect, because I didn't do it last time, and I just want to know that I'm not just after your job, but I know that I think he does it well. It's a big shoes to fill, but I feel that as a mother of 4, I'm 56, I've got to the stage now where I've just finished being in business. I've sold my business. After 18 years, I ran an education centre. My husband and I also owned a dental laboratory for 30 years, which I managed. We sold that as well last year. We've had great changes in our life. The 24 marathons and 8 ultra marathons that I've done have taught me a lot. I've also now got into the disaster relief space. I'm not only a tree fella, but I'm now qualified to drive excavators and skid steers. However, I do need experience, so if anyone out there needs somebody, I am free until I know how to drive them properly without killing anything around me. But look, I've got to that stage in my life where I'm ready to serve in another capacity. I've done my Navy service. I've brought my kids up to the point where they're caring, empathetic and responsible adults. I did a lot of work in the school environment to make sure that the people who were looking after my kids were looked after by me, that I could do everything possible to make their job easy. I'm here to enable people, to empower people, and I do believe that I am an integrous person, and I have anyone challenge on that. For those that do know me, I think it's wrong for good people to do nothing. So that's why I'm standing, and it is my side of politics. I'm not ashamed of that, and I think everyone else brings value. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. I like that saying, bad things happen when good people do nothing. And another favourite is think global, act local. So, and I just would like to say that we did get apologies from Zeb. and from Katie, and as I said, Alicia. So we'll move along now, we'll open it up to the floor for questions. I get to start. I'm not quite sure how we'll do this because over there Dave will give him a microphone so that he can, and some wipes, maybe take some wipes. And I will try and sort of stand out here, and I don't think with so many candidates everybody's going to be able to answer every question. It will just be too long and too laborious. So if you're not, that passionate about a particular question, feel free to sit down, unless somebody directs the question to you and they want to know your views, perhaps. All right. Where are you, Dave? Oh, okay. I'll just go first, and then I'll ask everybody. So, what do you think the role of a Member of Parliament is in the context of local issues? And being local, that means Canberra. It also means the electorate. So, the Bean electorate, the Canberra electorate, and we are here in Woden. Would anybody like to go about that one?
So of course there are two different houses, the House of Reps and the Senate. So in relation to the Senate has a particular role as a House of Review, but it is also the state or territory house. So this is an opportunity with the two senators that are currently in play to have direct representation for the whole electorate, to stand up for Canberrans and really prosecute for the needs of Canberrans, which, as I'm advocating, an independent has the capacity to do. But in addition, we have a moment, and I'm ready to roll on day one in terms of the 3 years that we have as Territorian senators, as opposed to the states that get 6 years, which is to push for, and I've already drafted legislation to amend the Electoral Act, to enable the ACT to have 4 senators, not 2 senators. We have doubled in size since 1975 when we've got 2 senators, and each of the states have grown from 10 to 12. That would mean we would have more representation, not equal to the states of course, but it would enable us to stand up to any attempt by the federal government to override territorial legislation, which is entirely improper. But it would also mean that the quota would reduce for senators because it's a proportional system. So it would reduce to 20%, which would guarantee that the parties would no longer have a stranglehold over the ACT, nor take the ACT for granted any longer. That would enable your senators to properly represent you, to direct your needs, and to have the power appropriate in a democratic system.
Thank you, Kim. I've just realised I think we'll continue to do the 2-minute thing too, it's just a safety net. But that was fine, it's just that, just so everybody knows. You are? Who's that? Oh, okay. Right.
So look, there are 2 parts to it. There's one that is out there in the electorate, and there's one that's in Parliament. So there's obviously in Parliament the capacity to be in the big issues today right across the country. But quite frankly, in terms of day-to-day stuff, it's actually about ensuring that someone's got a roof over their head, that their payments that have been cut are reinstated. That's the stuff that we do on a day-to-day basis. And so for me, it's actually been working with about 80 to 90 different groups right across the electorate, all different community groups, trying to work out where their areas of need are and how we can fix that. Much harder when you're not in government. You don't necessarily have the same level of resources, but you can still try and work out, where is the vision for the next 5 to 10 years. So there's the local stuff, and that's critically important, and that's to work with constituents, community groups, schools, all those groups. And then we've got the wonderful opportunity to be able to represent on the larger stage into the matters of national import as well.
Thank you. Tim?
Thanks very much. It's such an important question. I also want to observe that the work that a local MP does in Parliament is not just, or even necessarily primarily, about the decisions that are made in Parliament. It is crucial that those decisions that they make in Parliament, though, reflect the values of the community. And I think that's one of the crucial things that a crossbench member can do. A crossbench member has the flexibility and the capacity to go out into the community, to listen, to hear, to understand. and to facilitate conversations. And as somebody who's passionate about participatory democracy, that's what I'm really excited about, the idea of actually facilitating conversations in the community to find ways through where we can find paths where we actually can agree. The other thing I want to just observe is that one of the most exciting things that I've done in my life is establish the Buy Nothing groups in Canberra, which is just a wonderful way of people connecting and building social cohesion. And I would really, really cherish the opportunity as a local member to be able to use that space and that platform and the resources to seed and assist these kinds of community projects and programs to help build social cohesion in the community. Because too much of the time our politics is dividing us. It's setting us against each other. I believe that our politics can actually, if done well, bring us together. That's what I'm excited about as a local member.
Thank you. Anybody else interested to have a go at that local one? Okay, David and Slade, and then Jamie, and then we'll...
Well, I think just to add, I mean, I'm not a politician, but observing politics over the last few years, it's actually the independent candidates who are embedded in their community, connected to their community, and accountable to their community, and talking to them, the member for Indi, Helen Haynes, she has a number of sort of programs and ways to stay accountable to her community and is advocating for them on local issues. But I think when you have that connection, you're actually better informed to talk about the big issues that we're all facing. Because when you're truly representing your community, these issues are not usually specific to just one community, they're being experienced across Australia. And that's really exciting for me as an independent. And we've looked at what's been done in Indi with Cathy McGann and Helen Haynes, and actually committed, should I become a senator, to a number of ways to actually stay connected, to stay accountable. And I'd love to see that from politicians across the board, to actually be able to explain their voting record, why they're voting on certain things in that way. At the moment, we've got, a senator here in the ACT who's voted identically to 32 other national and Liberal senators, which it doesn't make a lot of sense if you're actually representing your community at that level.
Okay, I think just really quickly, I don't want to go back and forth too much, but I think you can be in a political party and be part of the community as well. I don't think you necessarily need to be an independent, but I take your point. But I think one of the questions is, what do you expect as well? It's one thing that I wanted to, as part of my journey, and I think that some of the reasons why I got involved have evolved over the last probably 5 to 6 weeks. But I think part of what I've been doing, what I want to continue to do, is actually to listen. I know it's very cliched, but I think what does the community expect from those that represent them, and going basically from one conversation to the next. And I touched on this before about there's a lot of sort of disengagement out there, and that's for so many different reasons. I guess that a lot of people actually aren't aware of what's actually going on. I come back to probably the most common thing that I hear at the moment in the electorate is it's a Labor town, and I can't stand hearing that, actually, no disrespect, but and it's almost this foregone conclusion, why do we bother? And I think one of the reasons I want to do this, I think in every member, is to not take Canberra for granted, not take your seat for granted either. And I think that's a really important thing that I think all candidates need to acknowledge, is to actually get in amongst your community, but also really fight for the community, understand the community, and be that sort of conduit as well. So, I'll leave it.
Sorry. Kathy Harting.
Thank you, Slade. All right, we'll open up to the floor. I have seen working in the Australian government MPs writing into other MPs and assumably to their state governments about issues that are relevant in their local electorate. So they do fight the good fight for their local electorate. Okay, over to you. First, Kate, who's got the microphone. If people could use the microphone, because we're Facebook Living, so it makes it easier for people that are streaming, and the other end of the streaming, to hear the questions.
Very good. Thank you for that. My name's Hugh Dakin, and I'm interested, obviously, in what's happening. I remind people that this is an election for the federal parliament. If you look at the constitution, you will see among the main responsibilities of the federal parliament, first of all, foreign affairs and defence, the management of the economy, immigration. Some of those things which these people will be responsible for or contribute to if they get into parliament. My question focuses on those on defence. Now, I don't think there's any point asking one of the members of an established party what their policy on defence, because they would say, it's on our website and I'll support whatever the party puts forward. But I would like to ask the independents, Kim Rubenstein and David Pocock, if they would give us their comments on Australia's defence situation and policy now, briefly, what they think of it now and how they think it should evolve. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the question. You're absolutely right. Section 51 of the Constitution sets out the federal heads of power. The executive government is responsible for developing those policies. As a senator, my role will be to review those policies. As an international lawyer, there's an undeniable right of the state to secure its citizens. That is fundamental to the sovereignty of any state and the responsibility to our citizenry. So defence is key, but defence is more than the Army and the Navy and the Air Force. Defence is also the security and the social cohesion of the nation, of establishing security beyond the notion of outward looking. It's also inward looking. So I think a holistic approach to defence is recognising our international relations and recognising our responsibility to secure the stability of our own nation. Now, I don't think you have to actually say there's a specific percentage of expenditure that must go on defence. This has to be a holistic discussion, but there is an undeniable reality, and we as citizens should expect a strong, secure framework within which we live and operate. And as a senator on a crossbench, I will keep whoever is in government accountable on all of those issues to do with defence.
You can look on my website for my policy. No, I mean, I support a strong defence budget. As Kim said, I think, you know, you're not writing the policy, I would support it. Talking to people in defence, the thing that I think we do need to improve is the quality of our procurement. At the moment, there are concerns around the politicisation of procurement decisions. The Defence Force needs to get the best equipment for the jobs that they need to do, and that should be up to them in terms of what equipment suits them. So I think we need to be pushing whoever forms the next government on that. You know, and I also support, I think, more work being done here in Australia. Talking to the Australian Federal Police Association, there are real concerns around the AFP, around resourcing. They're the lowest paid police force in the country, which doesn't seem right to me, and they play a really important role in securing us here and looking at a whole bunch of things around organised crime. They've been in, you know, the Solomons, working with regional partners. So I think we need a holistic approach, and for me a big part of that is actually upping our diplomacy. I simply don't buy the line that the way to make peace is to have a bigger army. Sure, we can have a strong defence force, but we have to up our diplomacy and engagement in the region, particularly here in the Pacific.
Thank you, David. Okay. Here? Oh.
Oh, okay. Question, firstly, I'll just do 3 questions in one. Sorry?
Just hold fire, we're just going to have one more on the defence.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's somebody else.
Yeah, sorry. No, we'll have these little tweaks.
Well, on defence, the first thing I'd say is I wouldn't tell defence how to defend us, I would ask them. Defence have already told us that they need submarines, but they don't have what they need today. You may have heard Clive talking about one hostile submarine in and about Singapore would bring our nation to a halt within 90 days. Well, that is ultimately true. We need submarines today. UAP are proposing to buy the attack class submarines, the Los Angeles class submarines, immediately. And that will solve that problem. But in terms of defence spend, yes, we're also proposing an increase in spend, but we're not going to tell them how to do it. They're going to ask.
And we'll just have trees from the progressives because, that's not your standard, small parties.
Yeah, thank you. Australian Progressives, looking at progress, the global strategic order is changing, it's evolving, and so we are looking to have a strong defence capability and be more self-reliant to build our own capacity, our own capability, and be less reliant on our current alliances because they may change in the future, so we need to get prepared for that. Also, as a few other speakers have said, we like we need to be strong in the nexus between defence and diplomacy, and being an international development practitioner, also development. So that three-pronged approach we think is really important for the security and long-term defence of this nation.
Thank you. Okay, back to your questions. And I'll just...
Thanks very much. Following on the defence theme initially, my question is to Tim Hollow. Tim, the Greens policy, I think up until recently it was you're going to spend 1% of GDP on defence. Your first 2 points in your policy were, let's all be nice and go into conflict resolution. I think you might have upped it to 1.5% in your more recent announcement, which is a step in the right direction. But I read your article where you said by forming AUKUS and committing to buying in the Never Never If perhaps 8 nuclear submarines, we actually posed a threat to China. The Royal Australian Navy has 8 frigates, 3 air warfare destroyers and 6 submarines and 2 helicopter carriers. The Chinese Navy has 355 warships. How can we be a threat to China? And in terms of your defence policy, which also gets rid of the Americans from Pine Gap, we've become a neutral country, and who is going to come to our aid as a fat, rich, fundamentally white country in the South Pacific and the Indian Ocean? Second one is, and I won't go into a preamble on this, but in terms of energy and power, we're only about 1% of emissions, China's 30 and rising, but most other countries have nuclear power, and we've got 36% of the world's uranium. Why don't we at least look at abandoning the prohibition on nuclear power and just look at that as an energy source, because we could be zero neutral by about 2030 or 2035, and please anyone comment on that. And the final question is for David and Kim. In the event of one of you getting in, what government who would you support, Liberal, Labor, into government in the event of either of you getting in? And congratulations to all of you for standing. I think that's wonderful you put yourselves forward. It makes our democracy work and makes us a great country. So congratulations to all people here for standing.
Thanks very much. I think it's important to clarify, I didn't say in that article that we would be a threat to China. I said that we were making a forward aggressive move towards China, and there's a very, very big difference between those two things. And I stand by that point, that moving towards nuclear submarines is a forward aggressive move, when in fact the crucial thing for Australia is to be defending ourselves rather than actually stepping out into the region. In terms of our broader policy, the Greens don't believe that setting an arbitrary target for spending is necessarily the best way. We want to see a balance of spending, and it's already been mentioned by other panellists today. The crucial thing is that in terms of Australia's security, we have drastically underdone our diplomacy and our foreign aid and behaving like a good neighbour in the region. The best way to ensure our security is to be a good neighbour in the region, and we've been a terrible neighbour over the last decade in particular, where we've dramatically reduced our foreign aid spending, we've underdone our diplomacy, and our diplomatic corps is begging for more support. We need to really focus on that side of the argument, as well as Therese mentioned, international development. No wonder the Solomons is looking to China when we're not doing our bit on climate change, you know, we're not doing our bit on foreign aid in the West, so we need to do the right thing by our neighbours. In terms of your second question, nuclear power is the most expensive and slowest way to boil a kettle anybody's ever invented. It's not a good solution. We could have our entire country and most of the region powered by renewables before the first nuclear power station in this region could be built, genuinely. Outside autocratic countries, the most recent nuclear developments have taken about 2.5 decades to build, and they've gone over budget by tens of billions of euros and dollars. So it's the worst option on the table. We don't need it.
Now we'll have the next about.
I'll keep this brief. You know, thankfully, being in the Senate, that'll be for the lower house MPs, independents to form government. And my commitment in the Senate is that every piece of legislation that comes through there, I will hold it up and look at it and say, how will this affect people in the ACT that I'm representing, and how does this square with the kind of future that we want in Australia, and make my decision that way. And on big pieces of legislation that we know are coming up, I'll be canvassing the community, asking for comment, so we can genuinely, when your senator's in there voting, he's or she is voting on your behalf. So I'll definitely keep that in mind.
So yes, David's spot on. Neither of us will be able to form a government, but every piece of legislation, as he said, would need to be passed by a crossbench. My 25 plus years of work has involved advising both sides of government and also critiquing both sides of government. And I see my role and the opportunity of running as an independent to stay authentic to that commitment to drawing on the evidence for every single piece of legislation, assessing it around the framework of transparency and accountability, but also the way it impacts on a range of different groups within the community, nationally, because of that role nationally of holding the balance of power, but as David said, specifically to the needs of the ACT community. It's that frame, which is not party-based. It's actually about looking at the evidence and assessing each piece of legislation on its own merit in a truly independent fashion.
UAP are unreservedly about bringing cheap energy to your home. If that is nuclear, then it is nuclear. If it's renewables, then it's renewables. But we need to be smart and we need to do it quickly. Energy prices are on the rise. It's all about policy. Essentially, policy is causing high energy prices. So cheap energy is UAP.
We will have some Facebook questions along the way. We have had one come in, but we'll answer this question here, Debbie, before we move on to any Facebook Live ones.
In May 2021, the International Energy Agency released their landmark Net Zero by 2050 report. And it provides a comprehensive pathway to global net zero emissions, requiring a massive build-out of new energy infrastructure based on renewable energy sources. It includes over 400 milestones to achieve these goals, including that there be no investment in new fossil fuel supply projects and no further final investment decisions for new unabated coal plants. I'm asking the independents, will they join the Greens and commit to a moratorium on all new coal, oil and gas projects between now and the next COP climate conference in Egypt late this year, while new climate legislation is negotiated?
Okay, we've got other independents. Can we ask some of the other independents? Jamie is an independent. Yeah.
I think the science is clear that we need to get out of, that we cannot commit. I'm standing because the coalition government doesn't seem to have any plan, and the Labor governments have continued to invest in fossil fuel infrastructure in both Western Australia and Queensland. I can't commit that the country will do it if I'm an independent, but if I'm in a position to influence government policy, absolutely.
So thanks for the question. Look, there are 3 areas that we really need to commit to as a nation in terms of moving forward with climate action. the decarbonisation of our domestic economy, addressing our export economy, and also investing in renewables. We know that we have answers to all these questions, but we have had decades-long intractable political partisanship that has prevented us from moving forward. What I'm putting to you and what I will be putting to the 47th Parliament is that we model a way forward based on the 1983 Prices and Income Accord that was developed through the National Economic Summit, which was taken outside of Parliament because of the intransigence at that time over economic policy. We are at a point where we need to actually build on the Australian Climate Roundtable's work, where business, trade unions, farmers, all sectors of the community have come together to start the negotiating. We need to progress that outside of Parliament, and what I'm proposing is that the 47th Parliament provide a secretariat to take it outside, to do that negotiation where all stakeholders' interests are taken into account so that we can actually resolve these issues in an engaged way that will come back into Parliament to actually have the legislation and the budget in order to move forward in all those areas.
Will you support the Greens moratorium on new projects?
So I think that is a clear way forward and I would support it, but I would support it in the context of saying that the Climate Roundtable needs to progress this issue, but I will personally support that.
Can I just add a sort of clarification? I'm actually standing because I think it's extremely unlikely in this electorate that the Green candidate will get up at the House of Reps. They what sort of percentage? Percent swing to? I think it is. I actually think it's possible. I think it's actually possible. I think it's actually possible that if the other candidates from other would like to vote independent for this particular issue, we will then get there.
Okay.
We should hear from David.
David, okay, very popular independents tonight.
That's holding the mic.
Yes, we have to ask the other.
Yeah, what I've been hearing from Canberrans is that we need a pragmatic way forward. The way I see getting past the current way we're talking about climate in Australia is with something like Zali Steggall's climate bill, which I think has a really clear framework for dealing with this. I think once we've actually got targets legislated, we can then speed that up. It's clear we are so far out of step with not just the rest of the world, but with our key trading partners. So I'm not going to commit to something like this. I think there's you look back to CPRS and we don't want to be in that situation again. I think with pragmatic policy and political will, we can actually speed this up to the point where the conversation shifts in Australia, and I think that will be inevitable. The world's moving in that direction. The challenge is to speed it up.
Okay. Right up the back there, Robert.
Yes, thanks everyone for coming along tonight. I do appreciate having stood myself. What a deal it is to present yourself to the public in the way that you are, and congratulate you for that. My question is, noting that the independents have been very popular so far, my question is now for the major party candidates, noting that the major parties are the ones that are most likely to form the executive government of Australia. Can you talk to me about your vision? I don't think this is something that gets talked about quite nearly enough. We talk about how bad the Morrison government is and what you really need to address in terms of what's going wrong. But tell me what your vision is for Australia in 100 years. Where do you see this country going? What are the big things that you think we should be addressing over that sort of time frame? One of the things that I'm really interested in is your take on the widening economic inequality in Australia and how that affects society in general. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll start with Janara.
Hello. Thank you so much.
You can move out here if you want to.
Yeah, it's not
that way. I'll stop you. And if the post is in the way,
I just wanted to see the gentleman's face. Hi. Thank you so much. I'm glad somebody has decided to ask about vision. one of the reasons I've run for this election and also joined the Greens Party is that I have lived a life of vision, in fact, and I work in transformational leadership at the moment. And one of the things you do a lot of work with is what is your vision, what is your purpose, and what is your reason for being. And I'm in politics for that very reason. I've lived my life a lot in politics, as a child, as an adult, and now as an academic. And one of the reasons that I think we need to do more work around vision and what Australia actually needs is because First Nations people have been taking care of this country for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And in 245 years, it's a bit of a mess, I have to say. Not that I'm saying this all to you to shame you or make you feel bad about it, but it is just a fact that the environment is a mess. And we did not make a mess of it in thousands and thousands of years, and that's a true fact. And so I think that my vision and the Greens' vision of this country is to return it to a place where it actually sustains our lives. Because if we do not have a planet, we do not have a country that can sustain us with food and water, what is the point of an economy? What is the point of productivity? What is the point of anything else? So it is vitally important. The reason that I'm in the Greens is because they need not only scientific knowledge, but they need First Nations knowledge around the world to help them manage the climate agenda. So my vision for Australia is that we all take care of each other, that we care and that we share about each individual human in this country, regardless of their colour, their religion, their gender, and anything else. We are all humans here, and we should be an inclusive society that recognises that we all have difference, yes, and that's important, but we must take care of each other. Our law in Aboriginal culture is that we respect everybody else. We respect each other and we take care of each other. And I think it's very important that we do that. So that's my vision for Australia in 100 years, that we are more egalitarian and more equitable. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so out of Labor, one of you like to, and then Australia again.
Robert, I'm going to have to disappoint you and give you my vision for the next 5 to 10 years because I'll be bleached bones well before then. But I guess even the next 5 to 10 years that we're properly on the path to reconciliation with our First Nations people. And we actually do have a voice enshrined in the Constitution, that we have Makarrata, that we actually are on the path to treaties across the country. I come from a science and engineering background, and my vision is a really simple one. Hopefully people realise that science and engineering doesn't have an innate left-wing bias. It's about evidence-based. So actually respecting and acting on the evidence that is before us, whether it relates to climate change, whether it relates to how we deal with innovation. There are some great opportunities that we have. We've seen one of the keys to dealing with inequality is understanding what's happened in our workplaces across the last decade. And what's happened is that we've seen a move towards almost 50% uncertain work, and whether that be temporary, contract, labour hire, the whole lot. And we need to turn that around, and leading by example, that has to start with the Australian Public Service here. And if we actually do that, we start to take out a lot of the commercial conflicts of interest that actually impinge directly on integrity. We can start to rebuild integrity across our public institutions as well. But that's probably my quick summary.
David, Slater or Jane?
You said personal. Robert, where are you? You asked me what my personal vision is, yes?
It's more of your party's vision, or how would you affect your party's vision for the future?
Oh, look, if being that I am 56 and I intend to, gosh, I hope you're all not here to check this out, but I intend to live to 120. So, that's halfway there. My kids are about to have kids, so yes, I want them to have a very healthy future. I agree with, everything that people are putting forward. We need a clean ocean. We need no plastic in our ocean. I know that's probably contrary as a Liberal, goodness me, I actually care about my planet. We all care about our planet. We need to live in a healthy environment, so whatever I can do to help enact that and encourage my colleagues on my side of politics to go down that path, I would certainly be doing that. But yeah, I just want to have healthy air and eat fish. I am actually vegetarian.
Okay, I won't take up too much time then. So I will say, yes, we're both in the same party, but yeah, I think I agree with everything. Of course, we want to do more. We want a better planet, a cleaner ocean, and all those sorts of things. It doesn't really matter what our political affiliation is. I think, in regards to maybe what Robert said as well, is I think we've got a great shot. I know we're as Liberals, we're a bit of a long shot in Canberra, but I've always said I wouldn't do this if I didn't think I could achieve something. So, in terms of a vision, and like David, I can't project 100 years forward. I think I look at and coming back to keeping it a bit Canberra-centric as well, and with my background around property and so on, what I've observed in the last 20 years in particular, and something that I'm very passionate about is, and I've heard people run on the platforms locally as well, is a home for everyone. It's something that, as part of what I call the Roadshow, which is a campaign and talking to as many people as possible, and I've talked to lots of people about the homelessness issues in the ACT, social housing, affordable housing, and those sorts of things. And these are, aside from all the other, the big ticket issues of health and education and obviously climate. I think it's, I've got 3 kids. How do they get into the property market? So the sort of things that I would like to impact, I believe. We've already started having some really good conversations in our side of politics, and we've seen some decent announcements recently, is to keep working to give people that, that basic right to have a roof over their head.
Thank you. Did you want to say something, Sean?
The 100-year plan. What I would like, and this is just from my own personal experience, is I would like to raise my children the way I was raised, and or however I like, and I would like that for them as well. However we get there, that is what we need to be focusing on. I would also like for government to be a little less prominent in our lives. Government is a transparent function, in my opinion, and not so prominent.
Thank you. Okay. Where's Dave? Oh, Dave, sorry, Dave's already given the microphone to another lady. Sorry about that. Yeah, she was next. Okay, Dave, you work out who's next. Okay, that's good.
Thank you. My question is really for the Labor candidates, that I'd be interested in the views of the other candidates. My question is, do you think Australia needs a population policy? We used to have a population policy, but we don't any longer. And please understand, I don't ask that question because I'm anti-immigration. I ask that question because I wonder, can we sensibly address climate change without a discussion of something as fundamental as our population level? Our discourse assumes, a lot of the discourse assumes economic growth, and it assumes population growth. Do we need to look at a more high level, in a more high level way at population? Should we have a population policy is my question.
Okay, would you want to start with Labor, Paddy or Dave?
Look, my views are still got great capacity to grow, and so great capacity to be generous in terms of being a home for those who require one. Those people who are fleeing or autocrats are challenged by other disruptions right across the globe. So I actually think we've got significant capacity to grow. I think when we look at it though, that we should be, in doing so, that too much of our growth has been based on only providing people with temporary pathways in, and they should actually be actually have pathways to permanent residency into citizenship. We're starting to see more of a two-tiered society by having too many people who are coming to Australia but not being able to enjoy an equitable set of rights.
Sorry, that wasn't my question. Do you think Australia should have a population policy?
Oh,
I entirely agree with you, and I think.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, I think there's, in terms of my commentary on it, is that I think there's, whether we have still significant capacity to grow.
Okay.
All right then, would anybody else like to address the population policy? It is a big issue. Okay. You go then. Go on.
Having worked at the immigration department, I can tell you we definitely do need to control our immigration. I would say we have very good opportunity for growth, but growth must be controlled. As soon as it starts impacting the cost of housing and our utilities, that's when we need to start slowing or pausing on immigration. Does that answer your question?
No.
Yes.
In the context of climate change.
So my answer is that you're spot on in the sense that in all issues that have multiple impacts on climate, on a range of different factors, we need a holistic approach to this. And population policy is indeed one of those issues. You're not asking us where we fit on where population should actually land. You're asking us, should we be addressing it? And the answer is absolutely yes. I can put you in touch with one of my PhD students who's been working on this, but the reality is, what your question is do we have a holistic vision of how we integrate the different issues that impact all of us in a variety of ways? And the answer is absolutely yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
I will say that the Greens are currently working on a population policy in relation to its impact on the climate and the climate's impact on population. It's not available just yet, but it will be shortly.
Thank you. Okay, Dave, where are we now? Nora.
So this is budget and our environment. $330,000 of our monies are used on spending on the infertility program that is torturing Joes to death as they are suppressed from the milk from the mother to the Joes, starving them to death, committing animal cruelty, illegal genetically altering them, committing mass extinction. $1.2 million of our monies are used and wasted on illegally torturing kangaroos to death, committing more monies wasted on their illegal daily and annual violent killings, torturing them to death, committing animal cruelty, and committing mass extinction. For years we've been asking to divert this money into establishing for pensioners and low-wage income earners to actually develop an animal, a medical care service that will allow these treatments and surgeries to commit and provide like raw animals and to allow people to choose which participating vets that they will take them to. And we're also calling for a federal government inquiry into all of these animal killings, kangaroo killings and all other macropods. It is Australia-wide, it is not just local in the ACT, and yes, we do have petitions out, several.
Okay, thank you, Nora. I think Chair, the nub of that one is about kangaroo culling. Thanks for the question. I think some of you, or many of you, probably know the Greens' current policy. As the National Secretary of the First Nations Network in the Greens, in the Federation, I'd like to let you know that we are very much against the killing of kangaroos and the killing of any wildlife on our country, because these animals, most animals in Australia, are totemic ancestors, and we do not want them killed at all for any reason, particularly if it's because of the grass. We're against it, I guess you could say, but the Greens Party is a party of consensus building, so it takes time to have
policy changed, and the First Nations Network is definitely at the forefront of the discussions we've had with the ACT Environment Minister, who is a Greens, and we think there should be a federal inquiry into any deaths or killing of any wildlife in Australia, but that's from a deeply First Nations perspective, and I will push that within the Greens Party. Thank you.
I think, Dave, I might just do an online one.
There's two Facebook questions.
Okay, well, we'll start with this one. It came in early in the piece, and it's just open to everyone. Why are you not campaigning for a universal basic income, help for retirees, and better aged care?
Thank you. Universal basic income is one of those questions which comes up so often in the community and never in our politics. It's quite amazing. It's one of the issues that I've been working on for a long time in my position at the Green Institute. And I think it's such an important idea. For those who might not know about it, it's the idea that we structurally end poverty by saying everybody in our society should get the basics of what they need to live, to meet the basic needs of their life, and that we ensure that that is available to us all, like with universal public health, public education, through a progressive tax system. The Greens are moving rapidly in that direction, and we're taking to this election a policy which is about as close as anybody's ever got in the Australian political discourse, which is, we're referring to it as a livable income guarantee, which is where we're saying every single income support payment, whether it's job seeker or Austudy or youth allowance or Abstudy or the age pension or disability support pension, needs to be above the poverty line. The Henderson poverty line, currently $88 a day. Most of these support payments are currently $46 a day. Barely half of the poverty line in one of the wealthiest countries in the history of the world, where there is enormous wealth being hogged by a small few. We have nearly 3 million people living in poverty. So we want to make sure that all of those payments are lifted above the poverty line, and crucially, close to a UBI, we're saying abolish the conditionality on welfare. Conditionality is where we say, we're only going to give you these scraps from the table if you jump through all of these hoops. If you fill out all of these forms all the time and make sure you don't miss a meeting, even if you have to cancel a shift of work in order to get there, or you need to do this parenting program, or you need to do this or that. And if you don't, then we'll cut off your payments altogether and absolutely throw you into the gutter. That is not, I think, how most of us would like to see our society and our country run. So we're saying, abolish the conditionality, lift them above the poverty line, and we'll work our way towards the UBI. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. So I feel that my policy, or the position that I adopted, was that job seeker should be raised to approach the poverty line. I am supporting the Australian Council of Social Services recommendation that it go to $70 a day at the moment, and I think we should ensure that people are allowed to earn up to at least the poverty line without being cut. The other thing about the unemployment benefit is that many people, like there's a whole, if you end up with if you get a malignancy, I'll pick some random person here who might get cancer, you perhaps know, and if you're, because the condition is treatable, then you won't be eligible for any NDIS payments, and the fallback at the moment, unless you had any other personal income protection, is that you'll end up on the job seeker payment. What was it? $46 a day. Yeah, $46 a day. I think it's 36% below the poverty line. So I feel we need to raise that to that. My suggestion about my policy around the elderly is that we need to be moving towards the Council of the Aged's recommendations for areas of focus for the senior members of our society. Both major parties currently have got a policy that they will move towards implementing the recommendations of the Royal Commission for Aged Care. 70% of the people who come to senior don't use the aged care system at all, and are therefore left out by that. issues of financial security, issues of healthcare, issues of dental access.
The Australian Progressives are actually campaigning across the country. We're running candidates in Queensland, South Australia, Victoria and ACT, and one of our foundational policies is ending poverty. And as part of ending poverty, we think poverty can be ended by some political choices that are made. So we are campaigning to fix Centrelink, to increase pensions, and we also have in our policy platform examining the feasibility of a UBI. We've got some passionate people in the party who advocate quite strongly for a universal basic income. Also, a federal jobs guarantee as well is part of our policy platform.
Thanks, Fiona. So if anyone thinks aged care isn't being discussed in the election campaign, they need to have a bit of another look. So Labor's position is to put an additional $2.5 billion into aged care, but to make it actually connected to particular areas of need. I mean, even in a place like Canberra, we have facilities where we don't have nurses on 24/7. We wouldn't think in a place as prosperous as Canberra that's the case, but there are facilities in Bean that are like that. So one of our first commitments is to ensure a pretty obvious wrong has to be fixed. We're talking about high need facilities too often where people have no access to that high need care. It's one of the problems we have in terms of other pressures on our healthcare system. But fundamentally, one of the issues that needs to be fixed is actually about pay in aged care. And many of you are probably aware, if you're not, you should be aware that there's a wage case at the moment in relation to aged care workers. Labor is committed to supporting that in full. Now, on the face of that pay increase is supposedly 25%, but that actually is only equivalent to $8 per hour. $8 per hour. So we're talking about workers who are getting $24 an hour for some of the most important and responsible work right across Australia. So it's a critical issue. It should be getting more broad band, I think, than it actually is. But we need change if we want to actually treat our fellow Australians with dignity and respect. And added to that, so if you're not in aged care, but you might be getting home care packages, in most cases you're dealing with a workforce that is largely contract and labour hire, and it runs into many of the other problems in terms of being underpaid and undervalued, and we need to fix that.
Thank you, Dave. Moving on to the next question. Dave is sorting out who was next.
Thanks very much. I actually did not intend to ask a question. It wasn't my plan. These are more kind of thought bubbles, but Slade was the first and only panellist that I've heard mention the word social housing. So we were all talking about housing affordability and things like that more generally. Earlier in the week, I was listening to the ABC radio. I'm not going to quote these numbers right. They haven't kind of gelled in my brain, but the commentators were discussing that the percentage of social housing in Australia is 3%, and that in some countries it is up to 50% social housing. So I just, that just is, that floors me to think that there's that big a difference. 3% of our housing is social housing. And the second thought bubble was about the aged care workers and the nurses. I work in healthcare. There's not enough. So you might want to put one everywhere and you might want to pay them, but where are they going to come from? There's just not enough. And you can't brain drain them from everywhere else. If you take all the nurses that are qualified elsewhere in other countries and you bring them here, well, that's just a brain drain and a skills drain on those places. I don't understand where they're going to come from. So thought bubbles, not questions, but just interested in people's views on social housing and skills. Thanks.
Dave, do you want to respond to the
Look, great point about nursing, because one of the issues we're seeing at the moment I think it is working. We're actually facing a real challenge at the moment across our primary healthcare system in terms of many nurses that are leaving the system. So there is a pressure of still probably needing to bring qualified staff from overseas. It's not the answer though in the end. We need to provide greater respect, we need to provide greater numbers and greater remuneration. We're looking at a 5 to 10 year excuse me.
It's okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a 5 to 10 year job. So there's an initial approach where we certainly will have to rely on bringing some resources in. But honestly, we should never have let it get to the stage that it has got to now. But we have to actually invest in nurses. Look, in terms of social housing, one of the real problems is that we haven't actually had a national housing strategy now for the last decade. So a national housing strategy is key. Look, there'll be a few differences of opinion here, but Federal Labor's committing to a $10 billion fund, which will, in the first 5 years, will support 30,000 social and affordable housing properties across the country, which will go into two areas. First of all, will be into particularly to support women and children who are fleeing from domestic violence, so particular emphasis there, but also a cohort where we're actually focusing on providing housing for critical professions, including nurses, because what we realise is that we're actually pricing nurses and other healthcare professions out of living in their communities. And look, obviously the additional announcements made by Anthony Albanese on Sunday about the need for there to be a national council set up where state, territory and federal governments come together to make this a priority issue and to at least inject more affordable housing in by having the government supporting equity in housing.
Thank you, Dave.
Do you mind if I... Sorry, Fiona.
Are you wanting to ask a question, Jude? Yeah. All right, let's finish off nurses and social housing, and then perhaps Jude has had her hand up for a while.
I'll just briefly address the housing question. Thank you so much for raising that. The Greens have been talking about exactly that point, that there is so little social and government housing in this country compared to many other countries. We've got we believe what we need is a 20-year program to build a lot. We're talking about the kind of scale that was done post-war with hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million homes. We want to see 1 million homes built over 20 years. It's that kind of vision that we need. I welcome Labor's steps on this, but 30,000 over a decade over 5 years even, is barely touching the sides. We have 30,000 people needing a home in Canberra right now, Canberra alone. We need much, much bigger vision than that. We also need to address the tax system, which is what has driven housing out of being a roof over people's heads and into an investment. That, I think, is the biggest issue. That means that where housing around the world has gone up in price by about 50 to 60% since the 80s, in Australia since the 80s it's gone up by 560%. It's not about supply primarily, although supply is an issue. It's primarily about negative gearing and capital gains tax exemptions, which mean that the wealthy use housing to make more. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to talk about nurses or social housing before we move on to Jude's question?
Thanks. Thank you. Housing affordability became my... Housing affordability became the third area of focus for me. Housing in Australia is clearly a market failure and we need to address it. Something, I guess, my position would be, as far as I can see, unless something's changed in the last 2 days, the National Liberal Party platform doesn't mention anything about social housing. As far as the Labor Party platform, as Tim has pointed out, is not quite adequate. The Australian Council of Social Services feels that we probably need 75,000 houses, maybe 25,000 over the next 3 years, which is probably about half, just over 3 years, the plan that the Greens is sort of aspiring to. So I would be going with the ACOS recommendation. Were I to be elected, I would be pushing that. Australia has adopted a is substantially underinvested in training across all professions and all skills. There were 215,000 apprentices who completed their apprenticeship in 2012. There's 77,000 for the last 3 years across the trades. I've been involved in medical education, I've been witness to nursing education. We just need a substantial investment in additional training. It just doesn't make money in the next 18 months. That's really the problem. You don't actually see a profit in the next 18 months.
Number 10 investment. Okay, Julie's on that one. Questions before we go?
Social housing is obviously part of our ending poverty platform as well, so we would advocate for a significant increase in social housing. But just on the nursing one of my 3 daughters is a nurse, and so I hear firsthand some of the terrible issues being faced there with overwork and underpay. As I mentioned in my opening statement, the progressives are about long-term planning, and long-term planning is also about workforce planning. What do we need for the future? How do we set these things up? And what are the incentives that we need to put in place to encourage people into certain professions? Nursing, there's also a gender issue at play there. Nursing predominantly women, female, and horrendously underpaid. So I think we need to adjust that. We've got some ideas in the party about something like a boys can do anything, get more men and boys into nursing, and also look at adjusting those pay rates as well.
We'll have Jude and then we'll have you down there. So Jude first. Your question?
Hello. I'm very concerned about the situation with Medicare. I know that there's been a huge amount of damage done in the last 9-10 years by this current government, and I'm very angry about that. As a nurse with 40 years, recently retired, thank goodness. My question is, and it's a question that I still haven't been able to get an answer to, Anthony Albanese has been talking about protecting Medicare. I don't know what protecting means, but I gather no more damage. But what I want to know is whether we're going to undo, if there's a Labor government, hopefully, whether there's going to be any reinstatement of some of that loss, like MRIs, pathology, and all sorts of hundreds of items apparently have been removed, not to mention anything else. So I just wonder whether there's a Labor policy, or whether you folk have any plans to maybe push any sort of policy to try and, I'll just give myself a time, try and undo some of that damage and reinstate it. And I'd also like Jamie, if I could, hello?
Hello.
If you could, as a doctor, maybe contribute something towards that, that'd be good.
About Medicare. I'll let Labor respond first.
Yeah.
I'll jump in and Dave can add anything I forget. As I mentioned before, I work for the Community and Public Sector Union, and we represent workers in Medicare, and obviously those staffing levels have been slashed, them plus the rest of the public service, 12,000 job cuts over the term of this Liberal government. And it's been Turnbull, Abbott, Morrison government. But I can't speak exactly to the cuts. It's 900. I know exactly what you're talking about, all the items they've taken off, and it has impacted people in. I've got friends of mine who are choosing not to go and get MRIs because they can't afford the couple of $100 that it is. $800, yes, $800 that it is. It's not acceptable. But as I said earlier, Medicare is of the Labor Party, and we will always protect it. And I think something we also need to talk about is the bulk billing rates we're seeing drop around the country. And we've seen the Liberals don't care about Medicare. They wanted to add co-contributions and all that sort of stuff. But something I'm really proud of is the Labor Party's policy for urgent care clinics. So there's going to be at least 50 of these around the country, and I think we've seen how well we've got nurse-led walk-in centres here in Canberra, how well they work here. Wouldn't it be fantastic for more Australians to have access to that kind of service? And that would, of course, all be bulk billed so that everyone can have access to the healthcare they need without having to tap into the already overstretched hospital workforce and in the system, and hopefully that can provide some relief for nurses on the ground, although I dare say you could tell me a lot more about what we could do than I ever could, given you've lived it for 40 years.
Jamie and then Shana.
I've had largely an operational rather than a strategic or policy role in health, and my focus has entirely been acute services rather than primary care. Much of the, and there's difficulties everywhere. One of them relates to, and this is true across many sectors, you know the 3% improvement drive, efficiency drive we're going to have this year? Every year we're going to have a 3% efficiency drive, and sometimes in those meetings I point out to the people who are telling you this, so that means that after 7 years we're going to be 100% more efficient, like double. And they kind of look at me as if I'm an idiot, you know, so then we move on about how we're going to achieve 3% this year. So I think there's been this sort of fairly relentless belief that everything's going to be improved. As a doctor, I can see about 3 patients an hour in the emergency department as long as there's not much wrong with them, because I have to talk to them to find out what the matter is. I then have to order something, and I have to come back and talk to them again. So even if it only takes me 30 seconds to work out, the actual kind of communication and interaction process is pretty much capped at about 20 minutes. I cannot guarantee a 3% improvement. So there's those sorts of factors that haven't played in. There's clearly huge challenges for general practice, particularly in Canberra. The area is so large that if I'm elected, I'll take about 6 months to talk to people in policy and strategy to start to get a sense of where there might be a low-hanging fruit that one could pluck first, and then what the long-term strategies would be.
I don't know how it is in such a wealthy country that we cannot have free medical, dental and mental health care. We've had Whitlam brought it in under his government, and I think it should be returned. One of the things you might not know is that under the Closing the Gap scheme for First Nations people, we receive free dental, medical and mental health care. I think that should be rolled out to every single Australian. If it's possible to do it for First Nations people because we want to increase the advantage and decrease the disadvantage and the gap between First Nations people and the majority culture, then it should be done for every human being in Australia. So the Greens have a policy of free dental into Medicare, free mental health and free universal health care for every single Australian. That means protecting Medicare.
All right. Okay, we have another question. Coming with me on.
Yep. Okay. First one is just really quickly. Men represent about 10% of the nursing workforce in Australia, but 40% of the nursing managerial positions. Men in nursing are doing just fine. We don't need to encourage them into this profession more. That actually wasn't the question I wanted to ask. Most of you are running on some sort of climate change policy. In a sentence, what is your policy and why is it the best one?
All right, so how are we going to do this? Shall we start in a sentence, work our way down? In a sentence?
When I stood in 2019, I said real action on climate change. I contemplated putting on my call for this time any action on climate change, which would kind of summarise my position. As an independent, I would support any action on climate change that will reduce our greenhouse gases as fast as possible. There's also climate mitigation and climate. Thank you. There's also climate mitigation and climate adaptation, which we also need to address. Thank you.
Well, this is just another thing that amazes me. So back in the 80s, I worked in foreign affairs, and everybody thought that the Greenies were a bunch of quacks. Sorry, is my mic on? Yeah. And as a First Nations person, I definitely thought there was something wrong with the climate a very long time ago. So it amazes me that now everybody else is talking about it as though one big thing. In the Greens, we obviously do not want to have any more fossil fuel, coal or gas power plants being built, and an increase in renewables. And I'll let Tim talk more about it as we go along, and Catherine, because they know lots too. Thank you.
I think we were asked for one sentence, so I'll say 75% reduction in emissions by 2030 and 100% renewable energy by 2035. That's our top level.
Strive for zero emissions by 2030 and considerable investment in renewable technology that is exportable as well.
United Australia Party's nuclear policy will see us within the next 10 years reduce all of the particulate emissions from coal. Beyond that, a policy, yet formed policy, around the electrification of automobiles is the next step to reduce it even further. But having said that, we will not. We will be pragmatic, and if we need to keep coal-fired power plants open to keep energy costs cheaper, we will do that.
So to repeat, the climate compact that I've recommended is the clearest way of actually moving forward. We need that structural change to move us out of the party's deadlock in not moving forward. And that's part of why I think voters now have numbered me as number one as the climate candidate.
Keep this to a sentence. I think there's two parts to it. There's the generation side. We need the big policy that actually unlocks the billions of dollars that want to go into renewables here in Australia. We haven't had that for a decade. And then, really importantly, at the household level, we have to work to electrify everything. Today I announced a policy which is a pilot here in Canberra to electrify an entire suburb, and then take those learnings and go across the ACT. Here in the ACT, we spend about $900 million on energy. Most of that is paying for foreign oil. It's not necessary. We should be saving about $5,000 per household per year if we get this right. We can expect to save it up after 2030 if we can roll this out across the ACT. So it's really exciting. We just need the political will to actually get on with this.
And the Livable candidate. So I'm not going to give you a headline tonight. Obviously I do support the government's position, and I do believe we can always do more. I mean, my personal view, and I think it's the view of the government as well, is that I support a steady and consistent approach, obviously, to the climate challenges that we have. And I know I'm not going to make everyone happy in the room tonight. I know, but it's as I said, I mean, that's my personal view, and I also know it's the view of the current government at the moment.
Thank you. It'd be good to know what the government's policy is, depends who you talk to. Net zero by 2050, and because we're the party that can actually deliver it.
Electrify everything by modernising the grid and making sure that we put billions of dollars of investment into renewables. That can do what President Kennedy said, which is turn crisis into an opportunity.
Two key things that haven't been mentioned. One is as we phase out fossil fuels as soon as possible, we need a just transition for all workers in the fossil fuel industries. The Greens have a $19 billion project proposal for a job-for-job guarantee for everyone coming out of fossil fuels to have a subsidised job for the following 10 years to ensure that that process happens in a fair manner. Second thing, the most crucial thing I think that we can do in order to get climate action fast in Australia, as fast as the science demands, is we need to ban all donations from fossil fuel corporations to political parties straight away. That is the biggest blockage to any action on climate that we have.
One short sentence: action that is economically responsible.
Okay. Caroline's in charge of the microphone. Questions?
Press it up. I did, and it went red and then it went on. Oh,
No, yeah.
hello. No?
Yes.
Okay. Bit of a pragmatist. Nobody's really spoken about taxation. I've got a real bee in my bonnet about the top 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%, whatever you want to call them. Big business, really filthy rich people, having all these loopholes, and the base people of Australia that work their heart out and their guts every day, supporting their families and building this country, whether they were born here or not, pay the bulk of taxation. What are the major parties going to do about that? It's time to have a really big change in our taxation system. Why have none of you spoke about it tonight? And what are you going to do about it if or when you get into power?
If I may gently jump in. The Greens are proposing a 6% wealth tax on all billionaires. In particular, we want to get
How about
rid
10?
6% is a good start. Yes, we need more.
Never
I would like
enough.
to see more. We also need to close all the loopholes that enable 1/3 of big corporations in Australia to pay no tax at all. We also want to have a proper working petroleum resource rent tax. We're talking about all of these things, and I think one of the reasons the Greens are doing so well in the polls and looking so strong is because the Greens are talking about taxing wealth in this country and using that wealth to make people's lives better on the ground.
Fiona, we really need Andrew Lee here. So Andrew Lee, the Labor's position in terms of tax in this election is to ensure that multinationals pay their fair share of tax, and not just here domestically, but making sure that we work with other countries around the world to make sure that there's a consistent approach for ensuring that they're paying their fair share of tax right across the world.
Repeal stage 3.
Hopefully including national companies as well as international multinationals. Charity begins at home. Our economic problems, if we tax the rich properly and big industry only in our own country, we could turn this country around, and it should have been done decades ago. I'm really disappointed in my generation and ashamed to be a baby boomer, because this country should not be in the mess it is in now economically. If the right policies had been taken into account and instigated decades ago, when we were all young, when we were all fired up about it, what happened to us? We got greedy. Sorry, can't help it. I'm really angry about it, and I have been for decades. I've just got my first grandchild, 21 months old, and I'm terrified of what my generation is doing to her future. Is she going to have dirt to walk on? Is she going to have air to breathe? Or is she going to have to emigrate to another planet by the time she's my age, 67? I'm frightened of that for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. We should be ashamed of ourselves.
Yeah. We've got 5 minutes to go. We'll have one more question.
Sure.
You got me? Yeah. This is a question for each of the independents. I'd like you to please explain to those present who is actually funding your campaign. And for those that are part of Climate 200, are you therefore really a true independent, or are you beholden to Simon Holmes Court's agenda?
I'm funding my campaign.
Thanks for the question. I've been very open about the fact that I have taken money from Climate 200. Climate 200 has had over 10,000 Australians donate money to them. Almost 1,000 of them come from Canberra, and that is money for independent candidates. I've had an additional over 400 people donate to my campaign, And I really welcome the scrutiny around political donations. And I would love to see the same scrutiny on the coalition, fossil fuels, big tobacco, Advance Australia, who have spent tens and tens of thousands of dollars on a scare campaign targeting me. So I really welcome it, and as an independent, I'll be pushing whoever forms the next government to actually deal with political donations. It's corrosive to our democracy, and we all know that, but it is inconvenient for the major parties. So I really believe that independents will have a role in forcing whoever forms the next government to deal with it. And so going forward, we don't have to have these ongoing conversations. But thank you, I appreciate the question.
Thank you very much for the question. So when I set up the Kim for Canberra party last August, in order to be able to be above the line, to enable Canberrans, 80% of Canberrans vote above the line, to identify an independent above the line clearly, that was well in advance of the Climate 200 initiating its support for independence around the country. When I invited people to join the party, there was no cost to join the party, but there was a clear donate button, because in order to run a campaign, while some of you may have known about me before I set up the party, I knew that I needed to raise my profile for people to know about me, and so it was the community that completely responded to my call. And it's very clear on my website that anyone donating to my campaign is in order to donate to enable me to be a truly independent with no strings attached. I then did approach Climate 200 because of my strong climate policy, and they have provided me a small amount of seed funding, but it is very small in relation to the overall funding, which I thank all of the members of the community who have supported me in enabling me to have my photo on those hybrid cars driving around Canberra, just to raise profile and all the costs that are involved. But I think you're absolutely right, and I affirm what David said, that this is an opportunity for independents to influence the discussion about the proper approach to funding, so that all of us have the opportunity to think about the opportunity to run and serve one another without having to rely on significant funds. It is absolutely key that as an independent, I remain independent in all that I do.
So maybe just to add and provide some insight, with Climate 200, there are no strings attached. If you are going to be pushing for climate action, they're willing to give you money. But I've never actually met Simon Holmes in court, and he certainly won't be telling me what to do if I'm in there representing the ACT. I'll be accountable to people in the ACT.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to 9 o'clock, or close to. Unless there's a burning issue that somebody feels that they didn't get to, oh, you had a question, Nora? They didn't get to say, then we will, candidates all happy, they got to say their bit. Audience, one question, oh no, it's sad. So thank you everybody for coming along tonight. We're better.